Morning, glory, and evening grace, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thanks for listening. The Great God Debate continues its concluding hour. My guests, author of God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, Christopher Hitchens of Vanity Fair fame. It's the best-selling book in America last week on the New York Times list. Also joined by Dr. Mark Roberts, theologian, pastor, friend of mine, blogger extraordinaire, author this week of Can We Trust the Gospels? His answer is yes. Both books are linked at hughhewitt.com. I want to get to one of the big questions. The impact of religion in the 20th century. Has it been a net positive or a net negative for human civilization, Christopher Hitchens?
Why just this century? I'm sorry if I'm being dense.
I'm just asking because now we know more, we understand more, we have the benefit of better theology, better learning, and growth as human beings. In the 20th century, how'd we do as religious people versus non-religious?
Well, when I think about the 20th century, I suppose I think of so many of its unanticipatable horrors. I mean, we behaved worse in the last century, probably as a species, than we ever had before. And you know what examples I'm alluding to, I suppose. And the implication of religion in all of these was pretty gross. I'm thinking I have a long chapter in my book about the role of the church, for example, in supporting the rise of fascism.
Yes.
I don't think they're ever going to be able to. I frankly don't think Christianity is ever going to be able to live that down.
But of course, we do have the neo-pagan Nazis, we have the atheist Stalin, we have the atheist Mao, we have the atheist Cuba, we have the atheist North Korea.
I have a long chapter on that objection, too. In fact, this ought to come up now, oughtn't it? I mean, secular criminality.
Yes.
Well, I say in my book that the axis of fascism, almost entirely a Catholic movement, all the way from Spain to Croatia to Slovakia, concordat between the Vatican and Hitler that lasts till the very end and continues to shelter Nazi-wanted war criminals after it's over and help them to establish other dictatorships in South America. The Japanese, led by someone who actually was a god, not just a godly person, but a god himself, according to those who believed in him, who no doubt thought he was the fount of all ethics in Japan and that there would be rape and pillage if people stopped believing in him. Turning to Stalinism, look, in 1917 in Russia, when the regime falls, millions of Russians for hundreds of years have been told that the head of their government is a person just a little below God. He's the Tsar, the absolute ruler and owner of the country. He's also the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. That's the inculcation of servility and credulity in the huge uneducated population. If you're Joseph Stalin, who studied as a seminary student, by the way, for most of his life, you shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you can't exploit a reservoir of servility and credulity like that. And he replicates it perfectly. There's an inquisition. There are show trials to expose heretics. There are miracles, Lysenko's biology. There's the constant worship of the leader. Everything comes from the top. Everyone has to say thank you all the time for the great benefits. It's a replication of the same thing. And by the way, the Russian Orthodox Church continues to support him.
Dr. Mark Roberts.
Which it did. If you want to point out to me a society that went into famine and dictatorship and mass murder and war and torture as a result of adopting the principles of Lucretius and Spinoza and Einstein and Jefferson and Thomas Paine, then we'd have a level playing field.
Dr. Roberts, did you find persuasive Mr. Hitchens' approach to the 20th century where, in fact, he redefined all of the atheist regimes into being neo-religious regimes?
Well, I must admit that did feel like that was a bit of special pleading because it seems to be evidence contrary to his main thesis that religion poisons everything. Something poisons everything. I think we could be agreed in that. But to say that it's religion, I think, isn't getting the full nature of the poisoning, if you will. It seems to me that we can look for something else. And actually, I found within God Is Not Great a quote that I rather like, actually. It said, past and present religious atrocities have occurred not because we are evil, but because it is a fact of nature that the human species is biologically only partly rational. Now, to me, the partly rational doesn't quite get it, but I think Christopher Hitchens himself is moving toward an explanation that sees the problems in this world as not necessarily stemming from religion. Religion, when it gets messed up with totalitarianism, when it gets messed up with partial rationality, religion can be turned to bad uses. Absolutely. Irreligious people the same. There is plenty of sin to go around on all sides, and so then we begin to ask, what is the deeper problem with human nature, and can we get at that somehow? And I think blaming religion, especially for Stalinism and Mao and stuff, seems to be twisting the definition of religion out of any kind of normal definition, dictionary mode.
Christopher Hitchens, when you brought up the Rwandan horror and frankly educated me on the Catholic connection there, which I did not know and found horrifying, I thought it was not fair, though, to leave out John Paul II's efforts to bring down successfully, along with Thatcher and Reagan, the Soviet Union, that if you're going to indict religion, it may have poisoned many things, but it certainly didn't poison Poland. It freed Poland.
Oh, well, I think you'll find, I hope you'll find, I'm sure you'll find that I do say
yes.
that I thought that John Paul II was an extraordinary human being.
Yes, but
in that respect and in others too, though there are terrible things to be laid to his charge as well, by any standards. I mean, he was a great mammal. This might be the time to reiterate my earlier challenge, because we still have some time left. I still want to be informed of a moral preachment or a moral action made by a believer that couldn't be made by an unbeliever.
I'm not sure that
because otherwise, you see, religion becomes optional. You can have a nice pope, you can have a nasty pope.
Well,
you can have an honest priest, you can have a dishonest priest. You have a fraudulent church or a frugal and a scrupulous one. But it could be just as well be a private belief. Now, that's unfortunately not really possible in religious terms, is it? Because you have to believe there is a supernatural power to which you owe some duty.
Yeah.
You make yourselves believe this. I still can't understand why you'd want to.
Well, you know, that let me say that there is a struggle for believers who are open-minded and seek the truth, and I don't deny it. But let me try to answer your question with an action that I consider to be one of the most moral that I do as a human being, though you and I might disagree on that. And that is the action that I did it last night. When my son was going to bed, I got next to him and I prayed for him. I doubt an atheist could do that. To me, that is one of the most moral of things I do as a human being. Gosh.
Well, I mean, I think it does as much good as aerobic dancing would do, frankly. I don't mean to be rude, but I don't see I don't see that it's a moral action. You also seem to suggest that in some way, by not praying for my children, I'm not as moral as you are.
Hardly.
Meant to say that.
No, let me be clear. I did not mean to.
My challenge, is it?
No, you can do many other moral deeds. You might get with your children in the evening and tell them how much you love them, and that would be absolutely fantastic. All I'm saying is that you asked for a moral action that I could do that an atheist could not do with integrity. And for me, praying for my children before they go to bed is one of the most important things in my life, and I believe it to be highly moral. And I doubt that an atheist could do that in good conscience. So
I don't say, but please don't misunderstand me. I wouldn't dream of saying that it was an immoral action. But I must tell you what I think, which is that it is an irrelevant one. I mean, it isn't of itself a good thing. And it isn't an action either.
Well, that brings us to one of my propositions. The vast majority of people listening disagree with you on that, Christopher. And atheists have always been with us. They always argue passionately. You better than most now with a fine book that is entertaining. But on the other hand, Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life has sold 20 million copies. The church in China is exploding. Africa's alive with evangelical fervor. The Catholic Church in South America is thriving. And so by any objective measure...
Islam is sweeping all before it as well.
Atheists...
It's a great time to be faith-based.
But atheists have failed again. With all of the arguments that you've always been able to marshal, it just doesn't work. Why is that, do you suppose?
Well, I say in the book that religious belief is ineradicable. It's innate. It's not innate in all of us. There are a certain number of people who always have been born and always will be, who now have to be taken seriously and can't be silenced and burned and imprisoned and tortured anymore, for whom it isn't possible to believe, of whom I am, as you can see, one. But it is still, it's a belief I have to resist sometimes. If we were sitting together and a huge rusting fridge fell out of the sky and hit only you and left me alone, I would sort of think that was a bit of luck, though it would be a vile thing to think, wouldn't it? Yes. I couldn't stop myself. And we're afraid of death. And we seek for patterns where none exist. One of the most awful things in the Bible I used to think when I was a child was seek and you shall find. Of course you will if you seek. if you look for a pattern and you hope there's a God and you don't want to die and you hope an exception will be made in your own case, you're very likely to become vulnerable to religion. But, I mean, you have to allow me to be unimpressed.
Mark Roberts, we got a minute to the break.